What's up YouTube, Capital G here talking Majespecter Unicorn Kirin in this video and asking the question, do you guys believe that this card is unbalanced? Do you guys think that it is broken and really unfair? I brought this up on one of my live streams and we had a real, pretty good discussion on it. And another question that I'm asking is, do you guys believe that this card should find its way onto the forbidden and limited list? Because in my personal opinion, yeah, I do. I think that this card is pretty broken. I think that it's pretty damn busted, and I know that we use terms like that to describe, most of the meta, but I'm talking about a card that, for how easy it is to summon, it just has way too much utility, and it is just so damn impossible to kill, and it's like there are so few counters that the card is incredibly frustrating. So, okay, if you don't know about Kirin, you probably kind of were like me. Like, you saw it when it was released in docs, and you pretty much thought that, oh, it's just another Majespecter. And this is probably one of the reasons why this card has flew under the radar for so long. Like, you probably don't see any videos asking if you guys think that, or if this card should be limited or banned or anything like that, because it kind of has been flowing under the radar. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that you really don't see it do much in its respective deck. Like, I play Majespecters, I like the archetype, it's really fun, but you really don't see Kirin making that big of an impact, and that's because, I mean, the Majespecters, they can't really pendulum summon it. Like, all Majespecter scales are 2 and 5, like, unless something changes, they're all pretty much 2 and 5, and Kirin is a level 6, so generally when you play the deck, like, I play 2 copies of it, and for the most part, I just use it for a scale. There may be once every few duels that I actually end up, like, tribute summoning for it, but for the most part, you have to tribute summon it in its respective deck. However, that restriction pretty much goes out the window with some of these other pendulum archetypes. See, the thing is, originally Konami kind of put a lot of restrictions on, like the pendulum archetypes. Like, there's a reason that Cleafort don't run this, because they can't pendulum summon it. But when you look at some of the other archetypes like pendulum magicians or, Metaphosis, or I guess they're called Metaphos in the TCG, decks that have like really high scales and really low scales, I mean, why wouldn't they run Kirin in their deck? I mean, this card is just so ridiculously good when it hits the field. Deck like Dino Mist, they probably run it too, but they only run, like their scales are like, I believe, 3 and 6. So obviously they can't summon this card. And one of the problems that I really have with Kirin and it being able to be splashed into decks, like you see it in the OCG. I mean, we all know that people were playing in the TCG, like, they were splashing like Majespecters with Pendulum Magicians, but in the OCG they're doing the same exact thing with, like Metaphos. They're just splashing in maybe a couple copies of Raccoon, and then, a couple of copies of Kirin because it is searchable from Raccoon. But one of the problems that I have with it being so splashable is when you look at pendulums, like most of the pendulum decks, like Metaphosis and Pendulum Magicians and Performa Pals, for the most part, they are glass cannons. Like, Dino Mist, you could put that in there too. These decks are, and I think Konami is designing them this way specifically, they don't really have a lot of great defensive cards, especially when it comes to like traps. In fact, most pendulum decks don't run a lot of traps. Majespecters are obviously the exception. They've got great traps and they're searchable, and that's all like well and dandy, but for the most part, most of these pendulum decks don't have a lot of fantastic defensive traps. They're supposed to be offensive decks. They, sometimes they make big boards, and if that board gets cracked, then they really don't have that much to fall back on. But Kirin, it feels like it artificially gives these decks a really good defensive card that gives them field presence at the same time. And the reason I say that is because if you happen to run a deck where your boss monsters come out of the extra deck, a deck that is based around Fusion, Synchro, or Xyz, it seems like, to me, it feels like you are just completely slave to a card like Kirin. I mean, if you've ever played like any of these decks, like Gem Knights or Teller Knights or, Mass Heroes or Shadows or something like that, and your opponent puts a Kirin on the field, it just feels like, okay, God, what do I do? Chances are I'm going to have to try and bait it out with like a really powerful extra deck card, and then I'm going to have to throw another one at them all at the same time. One of them is going to get bounced. I'm probably going to lose all my resources that I put into that card. Like, it really feels like it feels like the player who has the Kirin can just out these so ridiculously easy. Like, I remember a duel where I was playing against Metaphosis, and they pendulum summoned 2 Kirins turn 1 and had nothing else on the board but the pendulum scales, and I was like, I can't really do anything because, you know, the card is obviously it's immune to targeting and destruction like all Majespecters. But when you come with a body that's 200 or excuse me 2000 attack, then most of today's cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Or most of today's decks, they don't have normal monsters or normal summonable monsters that can attack over a 2000 attack monster. So they have to usually go into like the extra deck unless you're like Cosmo or Monarch and you're really not extra deck base. Furthermore, another issue is, and I'm not saying that counters make a card balance, because some people are like, well, what about Dark Destroyer? It's so hard. It's so, you know, ridiculously OP. But even that card, we kind of have some common ways of taking it down, whether it be like the Abyss Dweller plus like a Regeki, or maybe you go into Utopia Beyond or Utopia the Lightning. But what it feels like with a card like Majespecter Kirin, it feels like you're supposed to be able to attack over it. The problem is it can basically spin 90% of things that can attack over it. Like you can just spin them right back to the hand. So even that doesn't feel like it's a legitimate option. So it's like, goddamn, what are we left with? I mean, we can't target it. We can't use destruction on it. That includes something like Solemn Warning. So, I mean, good luck trying to negate the effect. You know, no effect, Veiler, no Phoenix Chain. But even if you do use something, excuse me, did I say Warning? Even if you do use like Solemn Strike on it, it doesn't even die. Yeah, you negated the effect for 15, 100 life points, but you didn't even kill it. So, even if you do kill it, what's stopping it from pendulum summoning back? You can't really attack over it in most cases because whatever you're threatening it with, it will bounce. And it just feels like, what? I mean, how do we answer this? I mean, non-targeting removal is one of the obvious choice, but a lot of decks don't have that at their disposal. Non-targeting removal is actually one of the most difficult things in Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially if you're talking about non-targeting removal that sends back to the deck. Like, that's the best way to get rid of a card like this, but I mean, those options are far and few between. Yeah, there's things like, Tiramisu or even Trishula, which is a non-targeting removal card that doesn't send back to the deck, but those are extra deck cards. Kirin can actually just bounce those, cards like the second that they hit the field, although Trish might, still banish it, but that's not really the point. It feels like unless you're running a deck like Monarchs, like, okay, Monarchs don't have a problem with it because they've got the Monarch Stormforth, non-targeting removal, they have Erebus, non-targeting removal, but I mean, what if you're not running Monarchs? It feels like you just get fucked. It feels like, you have to go out of your way with things like Kaijus, or hope that you're playing Drowning Mirror Force and that you have it at your, like it's available right then and there for you to open, for you to basically, wreck your opponent with. And what's really crazy about this card is, if people are really smart and they just put it in defense mode and they don't attack with it, it is extremely difficult to kill, because then something like Drowning Mirror Force and the Mirror Force cards aren't even an option. You won't even be able to put it face down with the Darude Mirror Force or spin it back to the deck with, Drowning Mirror Force. So you guys let me know what you think. To me, it feels like this card is, like, it's not doing what it was intended to do. It was intended to be Majespecter support. It seems like it has spilled over to other pendulum decks. You know what I mean? And it feels like, the crazy thing is, it feels like it's just much better in these other decks than it is in Majespecters, because these other decks can just pendulum the card with the greatest of ease, because, it's nothing for them to set up a high scale and a low scale. They do it all the time. And then it feels like it serves as a defensive card. It feels like it's impossible to kill. It feels like you have to kind of throw multiple extra deck monsters to get over the fucking thing. Like, like you may have to go into Utopia and then have the Utopia get spun, and you have to bring out something else in that same turn or something like that. I think this card is way too difficult to kill for, how easy the card is to summon, especially how easy it is to summon outside of its own archetype. So I think that maybe they should have made it, like, I was thinking, for some solutions, I thought that maybe they should have made it like level 9 and like 3000 attack, because then it would have, probably not seen as many, like, it wouldn't have been really like pendulum summon like accessible, because I mean, who the fuck runs level 10, or who the fuck runs like scales of 10? Like, I don't really know of any decks that have that. And then really it just would have been like a normal summon card, and it would have felt like a true boss monster for Majespecters, because I don't really think Majespecters have a boss monster. And please don't tell me that it's Pegasus, because it's just not. You're not going to convince me that a monster with 1800 attack and 2000 defense is a legitimate boss monster. So I've been rambling on for too long. Personally, I think the card should get limited. I don't even think it would affect Majespecters that much. It wouldn't really be that much collateral damage, because they only use it for a scale anyways most of the time. So let me know what you guys think of the card. Thank you for watching as always.